Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be starting in just a few moments. Let's see here. And I'm on a new computer, so this is an adventure for me. Okay, great. So thank you all for joining us. Just to note that we are in Zoom webinar mode, so Rose and I cannot see you or hear you. If you have any questions, type them into the Q&A. If you have any comments, type them into the chat. And I promise we'll dedicate 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the presentation to address any comments and questions that you do have. Rose belongs to an organization called Samaritans Inc. She's here to discuss suicide, risk factors and warning signs, and the skills that their helpline volunteers use to support those going through any number of mental health challenges. This helpline gets lots of calls for information, which they are happy to provide. Rose will review some of the best ways to listen and how to ask questions to get a clearer understanding of how to help support those who need it. She'll also review resources, including self-care for those who support others. Before anyone asks me, Rose will be sharing her slides with me, and I will provide those to you along with a recording and a feedback survey tomorrow morning via email. So let's all give a big virtual round of applause to Rose for joining us here today. And Rose, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Thanks, Robert. And thank you so much for inviting me in. So hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm really glad to be here. As you just heard, my name is Rose Cheyette. I am the director of the Samaritans Community Education and Outreach Program. And I'm happy to be here virtually with all of you today. I want to quickly just go over some quick housekeeping and ground rules, if my slides will let me move to the next one. There we go. So I want to just say off the bat that what we're going to be discussing today is challenging. It's a heavy topic, and I don't know if any of you watching this, participating today, have dealt with this in your life. If maybe you have had these thoughts before, if you know somebody who has, even if you've just been having a tough time lately, it can certainly bring things up inside that we sometimes don't even expect. So I encourage you to take care of yourself, and I'm really happy to connect with anybody afterwards if anyone needs some extra support. You know, you can certainly ask questions in the Q&A feature here on Zoom, and afterwards also works. So technology is unpredictable. Apologies if something happens, but we've got Robert here to help out if anything takes place that we need some assistance with. And lastly, we could talk about this topic for hours and hours and hours. I have 1 hour with all of you, so we're just going to be scratching the surface, but there's a lot of additional information that I will be sending to Robert, and he'll share it with all of you, and a lot more information on our Samaritans website. So more to come if you want to learn more. So I want to share a little bit about, just quickly, some of our Samaritans resources. So we have 3 programs, and I think the program that most people know about when they hear about Samaritans or just hear about us in passing is our 24/7 helpline. So we provide a helpline which can be called or texted 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is a perception that because we are a suicide prevention organization, our helpline is only for people who are thinking about suicide. And while of course we do get those calls and texts every day, we actually have more people reaching out that are not in a crisis, aren't thinking about suicide, but they do need some extra support. They are struggling with something. We have people calling us even and texting in the middle of the night. They can't sleep. Thoughts are racing round and round. Kids text us because of challenges with school or family. Older adults might reach out to us because they're feeling isolated. People are reaching out because of the pandemic. So whatever's going on, day or night, if it's a crisis, if it's not a crisis, this helpline is available. And I'm going to share a slide towards the end with that helpline number so that you can write that down. I also want to share that it's anonymous. There's often that fear of, will they want my name? Will they want identifying information about myself? And the answer is no. Even if you do reach out to the helpline, the person on the other end of the line will share their name and they will ask you for your name, But that doesn't mean that you have to share your name. You could give a fake name. You could say, I'm not comfortable. It doesn't matter to us. We're just there to support, to listen, and to, offer that compassion and empathy and no judgment. I think I know a lot of people that reach out to our helpline do have a lot of support systems. Not all, certainly for many people, we are their support systems, but a lot of people reach out to us who do have support systems in place, yet they still just sometimes need, a stranger who can listen to them, who can support them. So I think it's a good resource to hold on to. We have our community education and outreach, my program, leading workshops for kids, for adults, for older adults, people across, all different ages, all different backgrounds. And lastly, we have grief support services. And this is specifically for anybody who has lost a loved one to suicide, a friend, a coworker, anyone who is going through this type of grief. We offer programs where people can come together and discuss their grief and be amongst others that are not in the exact same situation, but some similarities there, because it really is a complex and different type of grief. So all of our programs are free. We just never want anybody to feel like they are alone. And I want to make sure you all know that we're here for you, no matter where you are in your life or what you might be going through. I'm going to briefly share some statistics. The challenge with sharing statistics related to mental health, related to suicide, is they're likely not 100% accurate. They might actually be very inaccurate. And the challenge is because, especially if I look at the number on the left-hand side, the reported number of suicides, well, that's just reported. There are likely a large number of suicides that do occur every single year, but they're not categorized as being a suicide. It could be a car accident that in fact was a suicide. It could be a drug overdose that was, did have that intent behind it, but not reported as such. So I think all of these numbers really have to be taken with a grain of salt. Here in Massachusetts, we do have one of the lowest suicide rates in the entire country. We still have, quite a lot though. So we still have work to do. Reportedly, it's seeming like middle-aged individuals are, specifically white males, are dying by suicide the most, followed by older adults. Again, that's reported. There's a lot of sort of inequity involved with, what is reported. And if certain groups, ethnic, racial groups, whatever it might be, are sort of not included in these numbers. So, again, please take it with a grain of salt. And for youth, even though youth are not dying by suicide at the rates of older individuals, it is the second leading cause of death for youth. So I think it's good to just kind of be on the same page with these numbers. We know it doesn't capture the full picture of what's going on, but it just illustrates that this is a public health crisis and something that we need to talk about more. Something that I've been getting a lot of questions about is this relation between COVID-19 and suicide. And it makes complete sense to get those questions, but it's hard because we don't really know. It's too soon to know how this pandemic might be impacting suicides currently, in the future. Some preliminary data that came out 3 to 4 weeks ago at this point from the CDC actually suggested that the suicide rate in 2020 had gone down, but that's just sort of some preliminary information that was found. I think the best thing we can do sometimes is, if we're trying to figure out how the pandemic might be affecting mental health and the suicide rate, looking at the past. And you can see this information that, my team had collected of during the SARS outbreak. There, was this increase in suicides for certain people over 65. And, looking back at Chernobyl and finding that people who were on the front lines had elevated rates of PTSD and depression, even looking, as far back as the Spanish flu. So, all in all, we don't know what's going to happen, but I think we can all agree that this situation has really shown a lot of really brought to light a lot of challenges that people had never dealt with before, or really heightened situations people were already dealing with. I mean, our isolation, our fear, economic fallout, all of these things are just sort of heightened because of the pandemic. I'm gonna do this quick true or false. I want you just to kind of think about what you think the answer is. I know I'm not going to engage with you right now, but I want you to think about this statement. Talking about suicide will cause someone to consider suicide. Maybe you think it's true, maybe you think it's false, maybe you're sort of like, I don't know, I'm kind of in the middle. And I do want you all to know that this statement is false. Of course, there are nuances to this. There are ways to talk about suicide that are really hard, that can be harmful, that can be unhelpful. But what I'm really getting at here is just the conversation we're having today. If we ask somebody that maybe we're worried about them, ask them if they're thinking about suicide, will these kinds of interactions lead somebody to have those thoughts? And they don't, and they won't. And, we find on our helpline, of course, we do ask every caller and texter if they're thinking about suicide. And a lot of times people share that they feel a great sense of relief, almost like a weight has been lifted off of their shoulders, because chances are they've had these thoughts, they've had these feelings, they're feeling isolated because of it, they're feeling alone, and they're feeling like, just really afraid of the judgment that might be put onto them if they share it. But by asking people directly about any thoughts they might be having, it can give somebody an opportunity to share something that's been on their mind that they might be just so desperate to talk about. So I don't expect any of you to leave this, 1 hour webinar today feeling 100% ready talking about this, maybe not even 50% ready to talk about this. I just hope that if any of you are kind of harboring a little bit of that fear, wondering if you could make somebody feel this way by talking about it, it can actually be a way to prevent suicide. So I want you to keep that in mind. This next statement says, people who are suicidal usually warn those around them. Now, this one does not have a definitive true, does not have a definitive false. It can be true and it can be false. I do have it listed as true here. And the reason for this is because there's been some research done to suggest, and some of the evidence has suggested that about 7 out of 10 times there are warning signs. But even that term warning signs, that can mean so many things. That could be somebody explicitly saying, I'm thinking about suicide. It could be a really subtle change in behavior that we don't even pick up on. So even that term itself can be interpreted in so many ways. There's often a lot of guilt associated with this. Like, should I have seen that warning sign? Should I have done something? Should I have known something? We just can't be held responsible for information we didn't have or things we didn't know how to interpret. So it's a really challenging one. I think the best thing that we can all do is be aware of what some warning signs might be, and then not be afraid to talk to somebody if we're seeing some changes, if we have that kind of nervous gut feeling inside, like this seems different, I'm not sure what's going on, and we're going to talk more about this. And lastly, suicide is caused by one isolated event or factor. Definitely false. It's good to talk about this though, because I certainly have heard, and maybe you have as well, heard, individuals or the media say, he was, for example, he was getting bullied in school, so then he took his life, or she had gone through a divorce, so then she took her life. It's often really made to seem like one mental health diagnosis, life stressor issue directly causes thoughts of suicide. And it's just not that simple, and it's not how it works. It's very complex. So I always want to make sure people are aware of just the complexities when we talk about sort of what might lead somebody down that path of thinking about suicide. And here we are again. It's complex and a lot is unknown. Oftentimes, when speaking to people who have actually attempted suicide and lived through that, very often they express feelings of, I didn't actually want to die. I just needed that pain to end, and feeling like suicide was the only way out of that pain that they were experiencing. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Something else that people in this field are really trying to do is change some of the language of how we talk about suicide. So you may have noticed that I haven't said the words commit suicide. And there's some reasons behind that. It's very intentional on my part, because the word commit carries, it can carry some negative connotations, a crime, a sin, something like this. And I think for a lot of us in this field are trying to, we want to move away from some of that stigma, some of that blame that comes along with it. So I try to say language like somebody died by suicide or took their life, and different things like that. So, language can build to stigma, can build to confusion about topics. And so I'm never mad when I hear somebody say commit suicide. It's the language that we have known about, but I think it's just something to think about. Let's treat people who die by suicide the same way we would treat someone who died in a car accident or from an illness, and try to take away some of that shame. So just something else I wanted to mention. So like I said before, as we know, there's never one thing in a person's life that might make them think about suicide or have, feel suicidal. We can kind of describe the things that can build up, though, over time as risk factors. So I have a list here. Certainly this list does not encompass all of the challenges, traumas, stressors, diagnoses that a person might experience, but it's a good list to start with. And these can build up over time, so maybe we have a person who's dealing with a number of these risk factors, whatever they may be. And maybe on top of that, they're feeling like they don't have a lot of support to deal with this, feeling really isolated. Maybe they are struggling with a mental health issue, a mood disorder. Maybe it's depression, maybe it's bipolar disorder, something else. Certainly a mental health issue, a mental illness does not cause suicide, but it can correlate. So maybe we have all these stressors and a mental health issue, and maybe hopelessness really starts to set in, just feeling like, I don't think this situation is going to get better. I don't see a way out of this pain, out of these challenges that I'm facing. And if all of that is piling up on somebody's shoulders, they may really begin to feel like suicide is the only way out of that pain that they're experiencing. So when someone is at that point of thinking about suicide, like I said before, we don't always have warning signs, but it's good to be aware of what they can be, just to be, better educated on this, and hopefully more able to see if someone in our life maybe is exhibiting any of these behaviors or saying any of these words that kind of can be shocking or worrisome to hear. So people sometimes express thoughts they're having, it can be very direct, it can be very indirect. So a direct statement might be something like, as explicit as I'm going to kill myself, or could even be like, I don't want to be here anymore, or something like, nobody would miss me if I were gone. Those are a little bit more direct than maybe somebody saying, what's the point of all this? If I heard somebody say, what's the point of all this? I don't really know what they're getting at. What is this? Is this a situation they're in? Is this life in general? I don't know. So whether it's a direct statement or an indirect statement, I think it's good to dig in a little bit deeper and ask that person, you said nobody would miss you if you were gone. Can you tell me more about what you meant by that? It sounds like you're really struggling right now. So, and I want to understand better. I want to hear you more about what's going on. So digging in a little bit more, even if it's a joke, even if somebody says a joke, and kids do this, adults do this, so many people do this, regardless of their age, their background, making just kind of a flippant comment or joke about suicide. And if I heard a joking comment, I'm not saying I would, take it 100% seriously, but I would at least make an effort to try to figure out was this a joke? Was this not a joke? Although I will also say that if someone is using that kind of humor and joking about it, maybe there is something else going on there. And people do sometimes say things as a test to see if people around are listening and actually hearing them. So it may be really uncomfortable to pull somebody aside and say to them, hey, I heard that comment you made. I heard that joke you made. You know, I don't know if you were being serious or you were joking, but I take those kinds of statements seriously. You know, I do, it is serious to me. So can we talk about this? And they might really, they could get angry, they could get defensive, they could laugh in your face. I would rather, you know, get that kind of reaction. I would rather offend somebody by digging in a little bit deeper than not dig into it for fear of upsetting them, for fear of offending them or making a situation uncomfortable. So you kind of have to do what's right for you, but just, you know, be aware of those statements. Physical changes, weight, appetite, someone's hygiene is starting to, you know, not be as consistent as it used to be, sleep changes. And then sort of from the purple down on the screen here, these are really behavioral changes. They're not doing as well at work, at school. They're not interested in the hobbies or activities they used to enjoy, those mood swings, that withdrawal. Now, I just got rid of some of these warning signs because I want these ones right here that I have up here. These are, I think, very common for people right now during COVID-19. I think for many of us, weight has changed, you know, not as maybe serious about our hygiene or how we, you know, are coming across. For many of us, it's not even that we have a loss of pleasure or interest in our activities or previous hobbies. It's that we can't even access them. Sleep changes, you know, we're more perhaps withdrawn. So if I go back, this is so hard to know. Is it somebody struggling with their mental health? Is it the pandemic? Is it somebody thinking about suicide? How do we know? It's hard to know. I think the best thing we can do is if we see somebody behaving in a different way than what we've known about them in the past, a change, speaking differently, looking differently, whatever that change is, that's a deviation from what we have known about them, let's talk to them. Let's say to them, hey, you know, I'm speaking to somebody like, hey, John, you know, I know that usually we play video games on the weekends, and the last like 3-4 weekends you've canceled last minute. And I'm not mad. I'm worried about you because we always did this and now we're not really doing it anymore. You know, something going on. Or, you know, John, I'm just using, I don't know who John is. John is an example. John, you know, I noticed lately at staff meetings, you've been really quiet and, you know, your camera's off a lot of the time, and that's okay, but that's different. You used to be really talkative in the meetings and joking, and it seems like something's different, and I'm worried about you. So just sort of acknowledging the change we're seeing and telling somebody what we're seeing, because, you know, a lot of times people have a really hard time coming forward and saying, I'm struggling, I need help. But if we can try to meet them a little bit more in the middle, that might be exactly what they need and exactly what they're looking for. So just switching to sort of some of the positive things, you know, we know people go through different challenges. Those would be the risk factors. We know that people might show us that they're struggling in different ways. That would be the warning signs. And we also know that people have resiliency and they have things that can protect them from risk and protect them from harm. And that can be many different things. It can be having a sense of purpose, being able to find hope. It can be having connections from family, friends, others, engaging in hobbies that we have, you know, turning to faith, that's something that, you know, is important to us, being able to ask for help. I mean, these are all things that can be really helpful and really important to balance out those risk factors. And all of us, you know, have some kinds of risk factors in our lives. It's just about, you know, how we manage it, how we deal with it, what our history is, the, you know, trauma, all of these things. I mean, all of us have challenges and issues, and I have challenges and issues. But, you know, I think we all can find these things. Yeah. So I think it's good for you all to think about what is in your life and what can fit within these categories for yourself. Because when we have a lot of challenges and they're just kind of building and building and building on our shoulders, it's going to reach a breaking point. And what that breaking point looks like is different for all of us. But if we can find ways to help ourselves and help others who might also be getting up here with their risk factors, with their challenges, it's better for everybody. Just in terms of sort of helping others and trying to figure out, actually, let me go back for 1 second. I think that it's really easy to fall into a situation, like let's say that I have a friend of mine and they're telling me that they're really struggling and they're having a hard time coping and, dealing with this and that. It's really hard as the person listening to not say, oh my gosh, have you tried this, or this, or when I feel that way, I like to go for a run to, move my body. Or when I have a hard time, meditation is really great. Have you done that? Why don't you do that? It's really easy to think about ourselves and what works for us and kind of throw it on to this person who's struggling. And I think it comes from a good place because we don't want them to struggle. We want them to find things that work for them. But that is frustrating to hear. I don't want to meditate. I don't want to go running. I mean, I know what works for me. So, one suggestion, if we're talking to someone who we sense or who shares is having a hard time coping, is really being honest with them and saying, I know what works for me when I'm struggling. I don't know what's going to work for you. I just don't. But I want to support you in this. Let's talk about this. I can share some things that I know work for others. I can share some things that work for me, but you may not like the sound of it, and that's okay. But we can brainstorm together. Just kind of open it up so it's not us just like dumping a bunch of coping strategies and different things onto somebody. Asking somebody what have they been doing lately to take care of themselves. Barriers are in place sometimes. Maybe we have to help them kind of think outside the box a little bit if there are things that are preventing them from being able to care for themselves. Just some suggestions of how to talk to somebody about this. I also want to say that if any of you are supporting somebody else who is struggling, you have to also be able to take care of yourself. The whole idea of, when you're on an airplane and they are talking about the oxygen masks, you have to put your oxygen mask on first before you put it on somebody else. I think it's a good analogy for caring for ourselves, caring about ourselves, caring for ourselves, and then caring for others. So something to keep in mind, I think we all wish we could, wave a magic wand and suddenly, be able to better take care of ourselves and cope 100%. And doesn't work. Even the best of us, even me, as this is my job, and I don't always practice what I preach, but it's a process for all of us. And if you are caring for anybody else, whatever that looks like, and you're starting to feel like you are, really focused on them and not enough on yourself, that's something to think about. And maybe some of that focus has to shift. And that can be hard to say to somebody sometimes, like, it's been about you, now it's about me. I think there's ways to do it with a lot of compassion of, I want to be able to support you in the way that you deserve it. But I don't think if I can give you everything you deserve right now when I'm not taking care of myself. So sometimes it's about, talking about those boundaries a little bit as well. Okay, let me just give a quick time check. Great. So for the last 15, 20 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time to answer any questions that come to mind, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we all can do to help someone. And it doesn't even have to be necessarily someone who is struggling with thoughts of suicide. It could be someone who's having a tough time with the pandemic and the isolation. It could be somebody dealing with some other mental health issue, any issue that's going on. I think that these strategies here are useful across any kind of conversation, across any kind of relationship, even a professional relationship. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is sort of what we teach our volunteers on the helpline. We call them befrienders. We call this practice kind of befriending. So some of the skills that they utilize to be able to better support people who are reaching out that are struggling. So some do's for listening. And I bet that all of you are doing a lot of this already. letting that person that we're speaking to express what's on their mind, trying to be non-judgmental. Now, I think many of us, all of us probably are like, yeah, I'm not judgmental when I'm listening to someone, but I think even the best of us are sometimes. I think judgment is a hard thing to tamper sometimes. So doing our best. This is all about doing our best, right? Doing our best to listen without judgment, being compassionate, putting away distractions, showing that we're present, open body language, even over Zoom, even over FaceTime. If we have the whole like crossed arms, it can send a negative message, even if that wasn't our intent. Paraphrasing, saying back to somebody, I think what I'm hearing you say is X, Y, and Z. Did I get that right? That helps to make sure that we are really listening. Okay. The don'ts. Also, please ignore the little stars next to the second one. These first two don'ts are really challenging. And I'm not saying that with these first two, they are 100% don'ts. The issue is that if I look at the first one, if I'm speaking to somebody in my life and they're sharing a challenge, it's kind of hard for me not to start to think about myself and have, it'll oftentimes trigger something inside where we're like, oh, I can really relate to what this person is telling me. And I want to make sure that they know that I can relate to this so they don't feel so alone. So it has really good intent, but what it often, starts to turn into is me saying to this person, oh my gosh, I totally understand what you're going through. I've been through that. And then I start to talk about myself and how I went through this. And now not only has the conversation changed and it's no longer about them and it's about me, they might feel really frustrated and be like, Rose said that she understands, but she doesn't understand. She doesn't get me at all. They might feel really judged, like I'm making a lot of assumptions. So there's good and there's bad to it. I think for a lot of people, it can be really nice when somebody shares about their own experience because it can help them to feel not so alone. But it can be really frustrating. So, I would just encourage all of you, the next time you're talking to somebody and they're sharing a challenge and you have that, that feeling inside, like, I know what they've been through. I get it. I want to tell them I understand. Maybe just hold back for a little bit, hold back and, validate what they're going through, ask some more questions. And that might be really helpful for them. Or, you could even say something like, depending on the relationship, say to them, I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, to be in this situation, but I've been through something seems a little similar, or I know somebody who went through something similar. Guess what? There doesn't have to be another person. It could be kind of a white lie, but it could just still be like trying to illustrate to this person that they are not alone. With our second one, again, ignore those little stars there. Don't give advice or try to solve their problems. Again, there's good to this, there's bad to this. Maybe somebody comes to me with a problem. I have some really solid advice to offer up. They take it, problem is solved. Bingo, that's wonderful. Doesn't usually happen that way though. And I imagine that many of us or all of us can relate to a situation in the past where we shared a problem we were having with someone and they don't listen. They just kind of start to spout advice at us. And it gets overwhelming to hear. It gets frustrating to hear. Usually we just want to be heard. We just want to vent. We don't want somebody to go into that fix it mode. And if we're trying to listen to someone and actively listen to them, we can't really listen and also problem solve at the same time. It's kind of, one or the other. So I think it's really good to hold back on the advice, but not always. I mean, maybe there's a situation where I ask somebody, what do you think would be helpful right now? It seems like you're really struggling with the situation. Do you want to try to fix this? I have some ideas I could share, but I'm not sure if they would work. Or is that too overwhelming? Do you just kind of need to be heard right now? Need someone to listen? Because I'm here for that as well. So that's okay to ask, to say. And then if they're like, I can't take the advice right now, it's too overwhelming, gotta respect that, and they might come forward at some point and say, I need advice, I need help. They might really explicitly ask for that. And in that case, I think it's 100% fine to give. I probably would just always preface it with, this is what I would do if I were in your shoes, or I'm not really sure what you've tried in the past. but this is what the thought that's coming to mind. So trying to have it just open up a little bit more to let it come from that person. I also think, just last thing on advice, if we're speaking about kids, about teenagers, developing our problem solving skills, it's a skill. I mean, it's exactly that. It's a skill. And like any skill, we need opportunities to practice it, to kind of work that muscle. So I think if kids, if teenagers, if young people are constantly being told how to fix or manage a problem, they're not going to be able to develop it for themselves. So just something else I wanted to say about that. It can be very tempting to say to somebody, this will pass. This is a phase. I'm sure it's going to get better. It may not be a phase. It may not pass. We don't know for sure. And that can be frustrating to hear. So let me just go back. Yes. Okay. So next we want to be asking questions to continue to elicit that conversation. We try to avoid why questions at Samaritans because sometimes that can come across kind of judgmental. They probably don't know why. They might feel like they have to defend themselves, their thoughts or actions that they've made. So we really try to focus on open-ended questions using what and how. I have a resource that I will share with all of you afterwards, which is just examples of open-ended questions and validating statements. I think it's a nice list to look at and just try to pick a few and be like, okay, I'm going to try to insert this question into the next conversation I have with someone, or, ooh, this is a good validation. I never thought of saying this. I'm going to say this to somebody the next time someone in my life opens up to me. So I'll make sure that you all get that research, or excuse me, that resource, not research. Letting them speak more than you. We like to try to follow this 80-20 rule at Samaritans, meaning that the person who's reaching out, who is struggling, who maybe is in a crisis, they get 80% of the talking space, and me as the person listening, I'm only talking 20% of the time. That's kind of a magical ratio. It doesn't always work like that, but I just like that as a general framework to try to give somebody more space to talk. The thing I want to just mention here is the last bullet point. I think sometimes we don't want to have serious conversations, or we really fear going into a serious conversation because we're really anxious and worried. Will I say the wrong thing? What if I don't know what to say? What if we're sitting there in silence, staring at each other? I don't know what to do. That I think that's really understandable to have that fear. But I want to make sure that you all know that, it's okay to not know what to say. It's okay to not be able to feel like you're not able to find the perfect words. All that matters is being sincere, being compassionate, being kind. It's even okay to say to somebody, I don't even know what to say right now, but I'm really glad that we're talking, acknowledging I'm at a loss for words. I'm stuck, but I with what to say because this is so challenging, but I'm here for you and I'll be here for you. And let's talk more about this. So that in itself, it's honest, it's compassionate, it's kind. That might be more kindness than they've been used to getting. So again, understandable to have that fear going in of what if I say the wrong thing? I don't know what to say, but I hope that isn't preventing us from even having difficult conversations. Again, doesn't matter about the words. All that matters is that compassion. So, like I said, way back in the very beginning, I don't expect any of you to leave this short webinar today feeling comfortable asking about suicide. However, I want to, of course, make sure that you all know, if you felt comfortable, if you were faced with a situation that you were worried about somebody, maybe you knew a lot of the challenges, the risk factors in their life, maybe you'd seen or heard some warning signs or potential warning signs. Maybe you just had that gut feeling inside, like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm worried and I want to talk to this person. So I want to make sure you know how to ask about this. Usually we're not going to be starting a conversation asking somebody directly about suicide. What we're going to be doing is, talking to them, listening, and maybe we just start to feel like they sound really hopeless. They sound really helpless. I'm going to check in with them. And I would say to this person, I know I'm really glad that we're talking. Thank you for sharing all that you shared. I'm hearing what you're telling me, and I'm worried about you. Have things been so bad lately that you've thought about suicide? Have you had any thoughts about ending your life? Those are kind of two very sort of direct ways to ask this. The third option I have here, asking somebody, have you ever wished that you could just go to sleep and not wake up? Or have you had any of those feelings recently? That's a little bit more of an indirect way to ask, but I think that's still an okay way to ask someone to kind of tiptoe into this. Another way that I like to ask it is, and especially if somebody gets a little bit defensive, like somebody could really be like, why are you asking me this? I don't understand. They could get pretty angry, actually. And it's okay to be like, I know that sometimes when people go through challenges in life, they think about suicide, and I know that you are struggling. And so that's why I asked you. So, again, I think, at least for me, I would rather kind of, I don't want to anger somebody, but I would rather make a situation uncomfortable and maybe even offend someone by asking this question than not asking for fear of doing that. So let me just go back. So again, another way to ask it would be saying to somebody, sometimes when people go through difficult things in life, they do think about suicide. Have you had any thoughts like that? Another way to ask it. I like that one because it kind of acknowledges that having these thoughts is actually really common, and many people deal with it. And whether you're feeling this way, if you're not feeling this way, wherever you're at, I'm here for you. If they say no, no, I'm not thinking about suicide. I'm, as the person hearing that, I might feel a huge sense of relief, like an actual weight is being lifted off of my shoulders. And I might feel so much relief. And maybe I even say to this person, oh my gosh, I'm so relieved to hear that you're not dealing with this. I would recommend not saying that, not expressing any of that relief, because, first off, what if they are thinking about suicide, but they just didn't feel comfortable sharing that? And also it kind of builds to the stigma of this. So if I got a no, I would say to them, thank you for telling me that. Let's talk some more about what's going on. I'm not going to end the conversation or walk away. We're going to talk some more. This is pretty high level here. A lot of people get pretty freaked out looking at this. Again, this is high level. This is what we do at Samaritans. We risk assess every single person depending on what their answers are as we go through these questions. This is just more for you all to see the kinds of questions that are okay to ask. Asking somebody about the means will not suddenly make them think about the means. If they've been thinking about it, they're already thinking about it. If they haven't been, simply asking about it won't suddenly make them be like, oh, I could do this. Asking about a time frame, if it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not. So a lot of clinicians go through a risk assessment. Obviously we do, like I said, on our helpline. We have had people reach out to our helpline with another person who was in crisis. The person who reached out, obviously got the consent of the person who was in crisis, but, that person who was supporting the person who was in crisis didn't know how to do this, didn't feel comfortable doing it. So we did that. So I think that's another thing I wanted to mention. All in all, I do want to say that when faced with situations like this, it is way too much for one person to carry the weight of this on their shoulders. It's so much. It's a burden. It's really overwhelming, and it can feel really burdensome. And so I just think, we just shouldn't deal with this alone. And it's a lot to hold inside. We do work with kids, with students, and one thing, myself, my team, we always tell kids, if a friend tells you they're thinking about suicide, you have to tell a trusted adult. And as you can probably imagine, there's often a lot of pushback, a lot of like, well, no, I would never go against my friend's wishes. I don't want to, ruin the friendship. I would never do that to them. A lot of pushback. And what I always do is sort of validate that of like, yeah, it makes sense. You don't want to ruin the friendship. That friendship is the most important thing to you. But wouldn't you rather have a friend who is still here and is mad at you than a friend who's not here anymore? And I think that a lot of times, just framing it like that can be helpful, while we also have to acknowledge that we can't control anybody else's actions. We can do our best to help them. And sometimes that does mean not carrying the weight of that on our shoulders, getting others involved. If it's a workplace situation and there's protocol, it's almost easier when it's like that. When it's sort of a personal relationship, it's muddier, it's more challenging. But I think it does show how much we care about someone if we get others involved to help that person who is struggling. I don't have a number or resource for all of you of, what to do in this situation. While calling 911 might be the fastest way to get to someone who maybe whose life really is in danger, that has a host of challenges. While reaching out to like a local resource, and apologies, I don't know in Tewksbury if there is like a sort of local, behavioral health mobile crisis team. I know we have that in Boston. A lot of other large towns and cities have that. That can be a really good option, but sometimes they're not as quick as 911. So I don't have the perfect option for you. I hope that someday in the future, maybe the near future, this will exist. But again, just keeping in mind that you have to, trust your gut, do what you think needs to be done, and all in all, also reaching out to your own support systems. I'm going to finish up in just a couple of minutes, and then we'll see if there's any questions. If we're in a situation, if someone really does express that they're thinking about suicide, or that they're thinking about, harming themselves or anything like that, we want to do our best to show that we're calm. That doesn't mean that you are feeling calm. You might feel really anxious, really upset. You might be kind of like up here, and like, your fear, your anxiety, your panic, it's creeping up here. But that person who just shared what they're going through, they're up here already. And if they can see that we're kind of creeping up there as well, it might just make the situation a lot more challenging to deal with. So like I said a little while ago, all we can do is our best. So doing our best to show that we're calm. Keeping in mind that you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know what to do, because there are others to support you in the community here at Samaritans, that you're not alone with this. We want to be mindful of our limitations because we can't control anybody else. And, I was a former helpline volunteer on the Samaritans Helpline, and I have, in the past had a good number of situations where a call or text ended with some ambiguity, and I really didn't know if that person was going to be okay. And I had to kind of hope that things would be okay, and know that, my supervisors were going to figure out the best plan of action to support this person that I was talking to. And that's really hard, because I don't know what happened with some of those people, but I had to know that, I did the best that I could within the confines of my role, within the limitations that were in place. And that was the best I could do. So we do have to keep that in mind, as sort of challenging and difficult as it is to think about that. Debrief, self-care, all important things to do after being in a challenging situation like this. Here's a helpline number, which I mentioned earlier, our Samaritans Helpline number. I really encourage you all to write this down, or, plug it into your phone. We never know when we might need some extra help. Like I said before, it can be easier talking to a stranger sometimes than somebody that we know. And I also want to mention that recently we were finally able to implement a sort of tele-interpretation service. So the helpline calling is available in over 240 languages. Texting remains only available in English. That's something that hopefully in the future we'll be able to change that. But that's something to know as well. my last final thoughts I want to say, first off, thank you all so much for joining. I know that this is a heavy topic. I really appreciate the Tewksbury Library for sort of doing these initiatives to promote mental health awareness during this month, May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. Suicide prevention is a really challenging topic. And, I'm guessing you all have busy days, so I appreciate you stepping away for an hour to talk and think about this. And I do think that we all have a role to play in suicide prevention. We may not be able to prevent every suicide, but I think the more education we have, the more understanding we have about, what could lead somebody down this path, what kinds of feelings they might be having, what those warning signs might be, how do we sort of more empathetically, compassionately listen to somebody, and then, that it's okay to ask about suicide and okay to involve others to try to support this person. For many people, certainly not all, but for many people, thoughts of suicide are temporary. And if we can help them get into a safe situation and get some help, there's a very good chance they won't die by suicide later on in their life. So something else to think about. Here's the phone number again. Again, you will be getting these slides. So if you missed writing it down, you will have an opportunity. I do have the survey. I know you're going to be getting a survey, I think from the library tomorrow, but it'd be wonderful if you all don't mind filling out this one as well.
And
I'm going to just
Rose,
throw it into the chat.
Throw it into the chat, Rose, and also send me that link, Rose, and I'll include that in the email tomorrow.
Except for I can't type in chat at the same time. My brain doesn't work like that. So here we go. Okay, hopefully I typed that right. So yeah, even if you want to like click on that link, open it up, fill it out when we're done, I would, really, really appreciate that. Lastly, here is my email address. I'm going to also throw that in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to me about anything, and I'll do my best to help you. And if I can't help you, I'll do my best to send you off to someone else who might be able to assist you with whatever kind of request you're having. And my very last slide before we get into if there's any questions is, because this was such a heavy topic, because of the importance of taking care of yourself, to also be able to care for others, I hope that if time allows, if your schedule allows, you can do something nice for yourself after this or later on today. And I hope you can all fill in that blank of how you will take care of yourself today. I'm going to take a walk later, haven't been outside all day. That'll be what I'm going to do today to take care of myself. So I'm going to pause there, see if there's any questions, comments, or thoughts.
And so Rose, we do have a question. How do we help children who have suicidal thoughts? So specifically children.
Yeah. So it's a good question, and it's hard, and it's tragic also to think about, young kids thinking about it, though they do. And, something that I do know about kids is sometimes they don't fully grasp what that means. A lot of young kids might, and I guess children, I don't know. Thank you for that question. I don't know if that is meaning like kids, 5 to 10 or like, teenagers, but so I think especially for younger children, sometimes they are not quite don't quite understand what that means, like what suicide means, what it means to die. I mean, I think for a lot of us, we don't know what this means, but to help that child, I would not deal with it alone. I would probably want to bring in some kind of mental health professional to try to help. But if I was going to have a conversation with that child, I would probably want to find out sort of, what this means to them. If they know the word suicide, if they are thinking about this, sort of like, what does that look like to them? Explain their thoughts more. What's behind it? How long have they been thinking about this? Did something cause or contribute to those thoughts? Just to better understand. But I really want to dig into if they kind of get it. because I know I've heard of a lot of situations, especially ones that teachers have been in, where kids, like young children, have said, I'm going to kill myself, I don't want to be here anymore. And then when they kind of ask a little more, there's sort of there was some confusion actually of like, well, I don't actually want that. I'm really angry about X, Y, or Z. I'm really upset. I'm really frustrated. So I do think when it comes to children, it's not my, I'm not a clinician. It's not my area of expertise, but I think that getting some kind of mental health professional involved to have those conversations would be really valuable.
Great. Thank you for that answer, Rose. I don't see any additional questions in either the Q&A or the chat. And I know this is obviously a very heavy and sensitive for some subject. And so feel free to reach out to Rose one-on-one afterwards via email. Her email is in the chat. I will also include that link to her survey in the email I send out tomorrow as well. So Rose, I think we will wrap it there. We're coming close to 3 o'clock anyway. Did you have any last words before we sign off?
I don't think so. Again, thank you all for being here, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Please don't hesitate to even reach out to the helpline. Just one last thing I will mention is that, especially with regard to the question we got about how to help children, we do have a lot of people that reach out to our helpline who are actually looking for support and how to support others. So that is another really good way to utilize the helpline. If you yourself are struggling because you are supporting someone who is thinking about suicide, that is a really good reason to reach out to us. So yeah, but thanks again, everyone. Do something nice for yourself. And, thanks again, Robert and the library for hosting me.
Great. Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you, everyone. Keep an eye on your email tomorrow morning, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day and does something to take care of themselves. Yes. All right. Have a good one, Rose. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.